Recently, we read a quote from Henry Edward Cardinal Manning. The book is The Present Crisis of the Holy See, and again, we strongly recommend reading the book. We'd like to go back to that book a little bit further up than the quote we used previously when we discussed why we're wearing black. The Holy Fathers who have written upon the subject of Antichrist, and of these prophecies of Daniel, without a single exception as far as I know, and they are the fathers both of the East and the West, the Greek and the Latin Church, all of them unanimously say that in the latter end of the world, during the reign of Antichrist, the holy sacrifice of the altar will cease. St. Hippolytus, after a long description of the afflictions of the last days, we read as follows: The churches shall lament with a great lamentation, for there shall be offered no more oblation, nor incense, nor worship acceptable to God. Now, Cardinal Manning's telling us the fathers of the church are in unanimous agreement on that, so it's already, this will happen. That's what he's saying back in the late 1800s. I am saying this has already happened, but this will happen at some time in history, which was the purpose of his 4 lectures, which were reduced to a book. But I'd like to quote from St. Alphonsus first. Hence St. Bonaventure says that in the Mass God manifests to us all the love that he has borne us, and includes in it, as in a compendium, all his benefits. On this account the devil has always endeavored to abolish the Mass throughout the world by the means of heretics, making them the precursors of Antichrist, who, before all things, will endeavor to abolish, and in fact will, in punishment for the sins of men, succeed in abolishing the holy sacrifice of the altar, according to the prediction of Daniel. And strength was given him against the continual sacrifice because of sins. All right, what St. Alphonsus is telling us is that heretics hate the Mass. They want to abolish it. And that Antichrist, being the son of lies, he's the son of the father of lies, in essence, just as Jesus Christ is the Son of God, Antichrist is the son of lies. What is the worst kind of lie? It's the lie about the divine and Catholic faith, and that's called heresy. So Antichrist will be an arch heretic. He will hate the Mass. He will want to destroy it. Let us go over to St. Francis de Sales. Is it not written that the revolt and separation must come, 2 Thessalonians 2:3, recommend reading all of 2 Thessalonians 2, read and study it, and that the sacrifice shall cease, Daniel 12:11, and that the Son of Man shall hardly find faith on earth at his second visible return, Luke 18:8, when he will come to judge? Answer: all these passages are understood of the affliction which Antichrist will cause in the church during the 3.5 years that he shall reign mightily. But in spite of this, the church during even these 3 years shall not fail, and shall be fed and preserved amid the deserts and solitudes, whither it shall retire, as the Scripture says, Apocalypse 12. Now, again, Apocalypse 12, read and study. That's a different subject. The 3.5 years, St. Thomas Aquinas says that we should not take these times literally in sacred Scripture. Okay? Because there are some say, all right, it's got to be an exact 3.5 years, or it's 42 months, or 10,000, or 12,260 days, or whatever. Because all these numbers are run all over Scripture, in Daniel, in Apocalypse, whatever. Put that thought out of your mind. It's not necessarily literal. I wished it were, but it isn't. And so, now, elsewhere I've identified John the Baptist Montini as Antichrist, Anti-Pope Paul I of the Conciliar Church, erroneously called Paul VI. Okay, he should be called Paul I, his predecessor John I, but that's another story. We're going to go to January and April 1970. The Conciliar Church, it's called the Conciliar Church because Paul VI called it that in the closing statement of Vatican II. This is the Church of the Council, which some have translated as Conciliar Church. This term has been used in later times, as you can read on the internet. It goes back, he's saying, we are now forming a church based upon this council, which we're going to throw half of it out, the good half, because the Spirit will flow from the bad half. Maybe it's 95-5. 25% good, 5% bad, as Bishop Hippolytus says. But it doesn't take much manure to ruin a whole lot of ice cream. There was bad, and the Spirit flowed from the bad of Vatican II. Okay. January and April 1970, they issued 2 notices on the question of the translation of Promultus, which is in the Latin Novus Ordo, as for all, or its equivalent in other languages such as French, German, Spanish, Italian. I have heard that Polish did translate it as for many. January notice is clear. According to the exegetes, the Aramaic word, which in the Latin language is rendered promultus, has the meaning for all. The multitude whom Christ died for is unlimited, which is the same as saying Christ died for all. Clear cut. They come back in April because people that, well, that's a little too simplistic, and then it goes in for pages, but what they're saying is Jesus meant to say for all. And so I have a question. Would God set up a language and use a language that does not have a clear, simple word for all, which he can use when he wants to say for all? Because that's the implication of some of the exegetes, some Protestants, some conciliarists, none of them truly Catholic, although they might claim the name. In any case, wouldn't he set it up properly, knowing what he would want to say, so that his words would be extremely clear at the Last Supper? Well, a priest, a South African, born originally in England, ended up in South Africa being ordained about 1962, I think. In any case, he came to this, and he's hearing this stuff, and he's having great questions about the Novus Ordo. So he had the ability to go talk to, I believe it was Cardinal Wright. In any case, to talk to a cardinal. He sits down with the cardinal. He asks the cardinal, Your Eminence, what does Paul VI say when he says Mass in Latin? Promultus? The answer, yes, promultus. And in Italian, per tutti, which means for all? And the cardinal answered yes. And then he said, well, until the Pope can figure this out, I'm going back to the Latin Mass, which I know is certain. In other words, he's saying Paul VI is schizophrenic. He had also talked to an Aramaic scholar, and the Aramaic scholar, he asked, isn't there a word for all? He said, well, no, there's not a word for all. There are 6 words that can be used depending on exactly what you mean. And so, when Jesus said the equivalent of promultus for many, he meant that. The conciliar church has redefined this so that one could doubt when they use the Latin promultus whether they truly mean actually for all, which that would be an invalidating intention according to my way of thinking. And so we have to ask, because Paul VI approved a declaration of the Sacred Congregation of Faith, January 25, 1974. And I'll quote, the liturgical renewal, effected in accord with the Constitution of Vatican Council II, introduced certain changes also in the formulae pertaining to the very essence of the rites of the sacraments. These new words, just like the other words, must be so translated into the vernacular languages that the original meaning be expressed according to the specific character of the languages. Pay attention. Introduce certain changes also in the formula pertaining to the very essence of the rites of the sacraments. Now, Vatican II, I don't have the quote in front of me, in the decree on liturgy, says that the sacraments contain 2 elements. the essential formulae, and the accidental rites. He uses different terms, which is basically what Trent says as well. They do differ on saying what the church should do with that, but both Trent and Vatican II agree that the accidental rites could be changed. The argument between Trent and Vatican II is whether they should be changed. Vatican II saying yes, and Trent tending towards no. But changes in accidental rites have been introduced since Trent. We're talking minor changes. I mean extremely minor changes. But they have been introduced, not into the Holy Sacrifice of the Mass, since quo primum, but into some of the other. And the rite of ordination had a minor change several hundred years ago. I mean extremely minor. In any case, he's saying introduce certain changes also into the formula pertaining to the very essence of the rites of the sacraments. Paul VI is saying we change the sacraments. We change the sacraments. So the rites of the sacraments in the conciliar church, according to the new rites, if we see something that looks like a substantial change, we must presume it is a substantial change and an invalidating change, because that was their intention as expressed in this declaration. We changed it. We intended to change it. So don't change it back when you translate, is what he's saying. And I'll stop there because there is another question that rises. Has the Mass ceased entirely? And we've already gone on a long way with this, and we'll cover that in another video. God bless you all.